Hardware Unboxed for part 2 of the October Q&A series. If you missed part 1, it's on the channel right now, so go back, take a look at that one, but probably don't just immediately close out of this video. Just
you can watch this one first.
Watch this one first. Yeah, that's probably a good way of doing it, but before we get into the questions...
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. What was the worst refresh that you have covered in your time as journalists? Oh, that's kind, calling us journalists.
Yeah, true.
Tech wieners. Refreshes. Gee, I mean, I don't like refreshes, period. We talked about the 14th gen and various ways of looking at it. No matter which way you look at it, I don't like it because it's deceptive at best.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't think of a refresh that was necessarily worse than 14th gen unless there's something...
They're all pretty similar, aren't they?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, refreshes...
You rebrand a product and it's like...
Yeah, like... There's varying degrees of refreshes. Like, you know, the R9 290 was refreshed as the R9 390, but it wasn't a straight refresh because they doubled the VRAM. They also hiked the price, but it ultimately made it a product that lasted longer, I suppose, with twice as much VRAM. But that, like, there are refreshes where things are enhanced, and we did see that to a degree with the 14700K. That got some extra E-cores, which... You know,
it was better than the previous product.
Yeah. I mean, it probably is worse value than current 13700Ks if it's to hit the MSRP. So it's like, you're not getting them for nothing compared to what we were already getting in the market. So it's like, but it is different. It's not as straight. There's
sort of the straight rebrand, which I think anything where it's just the exact same product that's renamed at the same price, that is obviously the worst sort of example. And then there's the refresh at a different price. So like the same product, but they lower the price. They give it a new name and lower the price, which isn't too bad. And then there's more what you were just saying, the sort of, it's the same silicon or the same, very close to the same silicon, but they've added either a slightly higher clock speed or slightly more VRAM or some technical aspect to improve it, and then maybe at the same price or a lower price. And those are sort of the least bad of a bad group, I guess, but it depends what they're doing.
The worst ones would be where they take the same product name, like a GeForce GTX 1050 or something like that, and they lower the memory. So because they still refresh, like even like the GT 1030 where that got refreshed with DDR4 memory.
That's pretty bad.
So I suppose you could that could come under the heading of refresh, right? Because it's the same product, they've just made it worse.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't have been a refresh if they were both released at the same time. Like you had the DDR5 or GDDR5 and DDR4 variants launch at the same time. But if they're sort of, they release the first version, they get all the positive marketing of the faster version, then they refresh it with a slow, crappier version and try and hide that behind the name of the good version, then that's sort of a refresh that's not good.
If you accept that as a refresh, and that is by far the worst kind of refresh. So pick any of those sort of examples, like the GT 1030, it happened with the GTX 1050, there was GPUs more recently where it happened
RTX
to...
3060, they had the 8GB model with the 12GB model.
Yeah, that's right.
Prior to that.
Yep. So NVIDIA is probably the greatest offender of refreshing products to make them worse. Often at similar price point.
I think AMD's cooled off a bit on the rebrand of the exact same product. Sort of going from 480 to 580 to 290 to 390.
We got like the 50 series, which was a refresh, but they changed the name. And although it was the same product essentially, but with a clock speed hike, they did sell them side by side, and there was a bit of a pricing difference there.
Then they are sort of bringing that back. We've seen the 660, 750 GRE recently and a few other versions along those lines. So, I guess each company has their own idea of what a refresh looks like, and none of them are good, so stop it.
Alrighty, the CPU market for the past 5+ years has been significantly better and more appealing than the GPU market, particularly if you want budget or mid-range options that don't suck. Why do you think that is? Is it because Intel is less dominant over its respective market than NVIDIA? Is it something inherent to the way GPUs are designed and fabbed, and also reliant on AIB partners that has killed the $200 market? Am I whining and graphics cards are actually great? Well, I don't think you're whining. I don't think, like, the graphics card situation is certainly better than what we saw years prior over like cryptocurrency booms and stuff like that. You can actually buy them, so I guess we should be thankful for that. But yeah, the sort of the current generation, which was the next generation not that long ago, was pretty underwhelming. Like, 4060 Ti being slow in the 3060 Ti and examples and stuff like that.
And being in stock is the bare minimum. It's not like...
Yeah.
Being in stock at the advertised price is like, that's what should happen. It's not... It shouldn't be exciting.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, though. Intel isn't as dominant in the CPU market. There's been sort of a resurgence for AMD. They've come from nowhere to be quite relevant, and really they're winning the sales on the retail front. They're selling more CPUs, as far as we can tell, at the retailers and distributors that we've spoken to. So that's forced Intel to actually make some price adjustments and sell like 13th gen, 12th gen, 11th, 10th gen chips cheaper. Like historically, they pretty much always sold at or very close to the MSRP. So we've seen Intel adjust pricing a bit to try and counter AMD. AMD's obviously been very aggressive on pricing, which has led to these really good value mid-range to low-end CPU deals. So that's all very exciting. It's a different situation on the GPU front, obviously. It's a less of an AMD versus NVIDIA thing. I mean, it isn't. Like, if AMD were way more competitive, then it would force NVIDIA if they didn't want to lose the gaming market. So if AI slows down like cryptocurrency did, then they're coming back to a market where they've lost a lot of ground, and then they'd have to be aggressive on pricing, lower margins to try and claw that back. So there is that going on, but obviously there's just a demand from a different audience or a different industry that's hurting gaming.
I think mostly it's more on the competitive side of things. Intel and AMD CPUs are much more closely matched than I would say, especially at like a high end. Like a 14900K isn't an amazing release or anything, but it's not that much slower than a 7800 X3D.
And they trade blows.
They trade blows, right? And you can see that across most of the price points and positions in the market. And I think a lot of people are still buying AMD for reasons like they already have an AM4 motherboard, so they're still buying older Zen 3 CPUs and things like platform support and things for future generation products, and the fact that AMD does have typically the fastest overall processor, which does help. Whereas you look at the Radeon versus GeForce, and AMD are quite competitive at some price points, but if we're talking about things like the high-end market, 7900 XTX isn't really at the level of a 4090, much closer to a 4080. And, that does have implications for competition across various things as well. With CPU features, there's not as many software features that you're being sold with a CPU, whereas on the GPU, there's so many more fronts that are being fought right now than just overall performance. And even overall performance is split between like rasterization and ray tracing, and the competition between NVIDIA and AMD is so different between those two areas, let alone all the features discussion. So it just makes the level of competition very, very different. But yeah, I agree. I think if either AI was less important right now, then potentially NVIDIA would have more reason to compete. Or if AMD was much more competitive in that field, then yeah, we would see a much more strong, healthy market. Because whenever the graphics card market has been the strongest, best, most healthy, the competition has been the most. Like you think back, the 30 series, if that wasn't ruined by cryptocurrency, that would have been a very competitive generation because the two brands were pretty closely matched. And if you think back quite a way as well to things like R9 290 era and prior to that, when Radeon, even ATI back in the pre-AMD days, the market then was really good because of the very strong competition between the various brands and the big improvements you were getting year over year. So when it comes to these discussions, it always comes down to competition. We don't want one player in the market dominating because that just leads to bad outcomes for consumers almost all of the time. So,
yeah, it's even worse when there's another market they'd rather service.
Yeah. So if it's a monopoly where that monopoly is focused on other things, that is the worst. So
yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. bring us back some competition, thanks. Next question. Congrats on 1 million subs. Thank you very much. Are you overall happy with the growth of the channel?
Yeah, I mean, never thought we'd get to 1 million subscribers, so I guess that's good. It's considering how underwhelming, how boring, how crap the industry's been for quite a few years now. The fact that we are still actually growing and we seem to get more views, and we're not producing as much content as we were a few years ago because there's probably less stuff to cover, and we're putting a bit more time and effort into the individual content pieces, which I think is a better approach. And, you know, we're living our lives a bit more these days, a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with the growth of the channel, really happy with the quality of the work and where everything's headed. We've got a full-time video editor now and stuff like that. And, you know, Tim and I are doing well. So yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the, I don't know, happiest things I've been about the channel's growth, especially with subscribers, is that I feel like we've never heavily pushed people to subscribe to the channel. Like we haven't at the start of every video been like, if you're enjoying this content, subscribe, or like we've done that occasionally, but I
don't remember ever doing that.
Yeah, but we've sort of just let it simmer for most of the time.
It's just organic growth. Yeah, it's slow and steady.
Organic people are sort of appreciating the content for what it is and subscribing if they feel that they want to subscribe. And I've been really happy that we've gone with that sort of approach. So yeah, to get to 1 million subscribers by going about that way and sort of just trying to produce the best content that we can produce and then slowly over time seeing the results, I think it's been, yeah, very rewarding. And it's good that we haven't just suddenly had 1 million subs and then the views haven't really changed or the feedback hasn't really changed. We haven't really grown in any other ways. It's all been building at the same time, which is, it's been very satisfying to see it go that way, I think.
Yeah, it's for the most part, it's been slow and steady sort of organic growth. There was the whole NVIDIA debacle years back, where we were asked to change our editorial direction. I think we got something like 80,000 subscribers in 1 month. So that was sort of a big period there, but there wasn't a noticeable uptick in like viewership for every video because people tune in for the sort of drama and that's sort of it. So I think the slow and steady growth works well long term, but we've never really had any growth goals. As long as we can continue doing what we enjoy doing every day and tinkering and playing with the computer hardware, don't really care about the numbers too much. So I think it was around, even when we might have been down around 400,000 subscribers, I was like, if it stays like this for the rest of my life, I'll be happy because we get to do what we enjoy doing every day. And as long as that level is, you know, maintained, then everything else is a bonus.
Yeah, I think you've talked in the past about how we don't really run Hardware Unboxed like a business. Like a lot of businesses, especially these days, like the big corporate, you know, world stuff, they're always chasing like profit margins and unlimited growth and like numbers always have to go up and stuff. But I think for us, we've been like, so long as we can pay the bills and everyone, like we've got 3 employees now, so kind of everyone is sort of getting their fair share and things like that, then we don't need like unlimited growth. And I think as well, we've sort of acknowledged that it's a fairly niche thing that we're sort of covering. Like we're never, in my opinion, going to be like a 10 million sub channel. Like the audience for PC gamers is not the audience of like a Mr. Beast or a Dude Perfect or one of those channels that makes very mainstream stuff. So there's always the acknowledgement there that like there is going to be a limit on the amount of people that can be interested in our content. And so long as we can sustain what we're sustaining and enjoy doing the work and everyone's sort of happy and satisfied, then we don't need to chase unlimited growth. We don't need numbers higher than the previous month every single month.
That's right. If we were after growth and making as much money as possible, that we would make it much more mainstream focused, really change a lot of the way we go about things to make the channel more appealing to a wider audience. Whereas, we keep it very, focused on what we do, which has a pretty limited scope, but we enjoy doing it and we have enough viewers to keep doing it. So
it's been going well.
So we'll see you at 2 million in about 10 years if all goes to plan.
Yeah, you'll be an even older man at that point, which would be very fun.
I'll be in my 50s. You'll be old by then as well, though.
I'll be old by the metric I've used to call you old now.
That's
which will be very upsetting for me. So I'll have to readjust those metrics as we go, so I'm always in the clear.
Does sound like something you'll do. All right, interesting one here. How the heck Do you stick the CPU onto everything in your BRoll? Well, Tim and I don't do that, but we'll call in Balin. Can you come and explain how this works? This is Balin's our video editor.
There's a CPU for you.
Oh, thanks.
It's all right. Magic ingredient is the good old-fashioned blue tack. If you could please put that on the back.
Does come in a variety of colours.
And people are like, oh my God, the CPU pad. You're just...
So then you just push it down.
Just give it a good push. And then you've got...
Hopefully that doesn't drop off.
It won't. See?
There you go. So that's how we do it. Thank
Nice.
you, Balin.
No worries.
Okay. Are AM5 CPUs still melting? Well, none of ours ever melted, and we've got a lot of them in a lot of different systems, never had a problem. I don't know how widespread this issue was, or at least how many people were affected. We saw some reports, nowhere near as much as the 12-volt high-powered connectors melting.
I don't think so.
And it's, I guess to answer the question, are they still melting? Well, no, not to my knowledge. I believe the BIOSes that addressed that some time ago now have stopped that problem. And yeah, I mean, I've not heard of it. I saw very few examples to begin with, so I'm not sure how much of a major issue it was. It was obviously a potential problem, but my understanding is it's been solved now, and yeah, we'll wait for the next disaster. Are Radeon's problems really just marketing problems? The hilariously bad execution of Anti-Lag Plus, FSR frame generation have been pretty awful launch, and AMD screwing up stuff like making the RDNA 3 encoder output 1082p instead of 1080p. They all seem to go beyond mere marketing issues. The first two are software/driver and a game integration, while the latter is straight up hardware design flaw. So have you got much to say about this one?
I think part of that's true. Part of it is the execution of these features has not been great. Part of it, though, if I think of like FSR3, for example, yeah, the feature isn't amazing, but part of me thinks it was rushed because marketing had announced it way too early. Mm-hmm. And I think that set the whole perception of the feature from the start. Like, they announced it in November of 2022. It came out in September of 2023, maybe even a little bit before that for FSR3 announcement. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. They were sort of under the pump to release this feature because it just was becoming more and more embarrassing for them that they hadn't gotten a feature out that they'd announced for so long. So the team that's developing the features rushing to get it done, and some of the things that were kind of crucial for the feature to be good were just ignored or missed or not quite there in the final version. And there were even issues like the version that they'd uploaded to GPU Open or were going to make available on GPU Open was a newer version than the sort of more broken, buggy version that was in the first couple of games. So if marketing had just not announced that feature and given them more time and breathing room, it wouldn't have been great to not have like a frame generation competitor announce while you're announcing new GPUs, but maybe they would have been under less of pressure to get it out. And even when they did release it, if it was closer to the announcement, they could have been like, well, we only announced this a month ago, you know, it's still under development as sort of like a beta version or a preview version. So by the time people are testing it, they find issues. The framing is very different to sort of how the marketing has been setting things up. Anti-Lag Plus, though, yeah, that's just a fail. And I think we talked about that in the podcast. That is just more of a technical thing. I don't think they really market it as like this is going to solve all your problems, and then they just didn't bother talking to the game developers and getting people banned. So, yeah, that's not great. But, yeah, I don't know. Would you think it's like a combination of the factors, or is it more just some of these features not being great?
I don't know if there's a way you can put it that sort of... there's so many different things with AMD where, you know, I made the joke in my recent video where it's just AMDing themselves. Like, AMD does unexplainably stupid things from time to time, but then I guess NVIDIA and Intel make questionable choices at times as well. I guess it's a company thing. AMD do seem to shoot themselves in the foot more than they should. And one example, the one that I was talking about recently, is the fact that everyone's celebrating AM4 for being such a great platform, or a lot of people are anyway. And I think no matter whether you're an Intel fan or whatever, it really is pretty hard to deny the success of AM4. It's been a great platform. It's seen many CPU generations. The performance improvements across multiple generations were huge. You know, we've got the introduction of 3D V-Cache, all that sort of stuff. As it is today, AM4, great success. But if you think back a bit, what year was it? Was it 2019? I can't remember now. But somewhere almost mid-cycle, AMD tried to undo all of that and destroy it and just make it like a regular kind of platform when I think it was around was it B450 where they announced they were going to discontinue support moving forward for the backwards compatibility. So
I think it was for Zen 3, the CPUs were coming out and they're like...
It was going to be a fragmented platform.
Yeah, like you can't put this on a B450 platform, and everyone was like, what's the technical reason? And then AMD made this sort of like BS reason.
They were just like, too hard. Basically, it was like, too hard, we can't be bothered.
Well, I think they tried to claim that it was like technically very complicated or something, and then like within days had completely backflipped on it and said, yeah, we can actually do this.
Yeah, but...
That's from memory.
Yeah, that's right. Regardless of what had happened, the point is, if AMD had their own way, if there was no community pushback, they would have axed support and AM4 would have become this fragmented platform where there's not broad platform compatibility from end to end. Like you've got to have certain CPU and chipset combinations for it to work, which would have sucked. Like people with first, second, and possibly third generation or the Zen Pluses in there somewhere wouldn't have been able to get like a 5800X 3D. You wouldn't have been able to put that on a B350 motherboard, for example, and that would have sucked. And
it would have hurt sales of that chip for sure.
Yeah, it would have hurt sales of that chip. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of other chips because, 5700X, that's a great value chip these days, even like the 5600. So it would have made AM4 far less successful than it is today. I think that would have also had a knock-on effect and made AM5 less successful because a lot of people are hoping to see a similar thing out of AM5 when they're investing in it. Because if you had a great experience with AM4, if you bought like a half-decent B350 board, you put a Ryzen 5000 CPU of any description on there, that would be a massive performance uplift. And you think, well, that was awesome. That was great. Don't want to go back to Intel where you get that sort of TikTok thing, which, I know they've sort of abandoned that, but they're still doing it anyway. So that's just another example of like, if AMD had their own way, AMD themselves, they would have destroyed one of the best marketing assets I think they've had in the last decade. So it's just...
Yeah, and that was not a technical...
It's just poor decisions.
Yeah, that was a very much a marketing executive level decision thing, as opposed to more of a failing of technical execution, because they did, and it was proven that they could support those new CPUs on the older motherboards. They did do it, and it was, other decision makers in the chain that was trying to reverse that. And I think as well, with like a lot of the complaints we've had about the Radeon division have been things around pricing and positioning in the market. Like whenever there's been an opportunity for AMD to produce a product that's really compelling and gain market share and be really appealing to gamers in a market where right now gaming GPUs have not exactly been super compelling and lots of people have been complaining about them being too expensive, AMD has once again priced these products just nonsensically. Like the 7700 XT and 7900 XT MSRPs don't make any sense given the performance of the product. So it's those sort of things that I'm thinking are more on the marketing side. Like the 7700 XT and 7900 XT are good functional products. Like there's nothing technically that's wrong with them. They have pretty good features and enough VRAM and enough performance, but then they come out with this price that is just ludicrous. So yeah, that's a marketing fail. And it's kind of like those unforced errors, like easy things that can be avoided to make the Radeon brand seem more appealing to buyers. And I think a company like NVIDIA doesn't do, like, I can't say they do none of those things, because there have been certainly things like the 16 gig 4060 Ti coming out at $100 more, which makes absolutely no sense. Hard to justify, and they drop the price within a few months. But I feel like they may be a bit more protective of the brand and, sort of don't make as many of those just weird blunders. So, I think...
Well, it's easier to do that when you're in a dominant position.
Yeah, it is.
And you have
easier.
the mind share, and you can release a $1,600 GPU. Admittedly, it's an impressive performer, but even like the RTX 4080, you can release that at $1,200 US, and it didn't sell as well, but relative to the Radeon GPUs, they can kind of command that price, whereas AMD can't just go and sort of copy them to a degree. And that was $200 cheaper, but probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But they need to be... They need to be much more compelling, like what they did with, Ryzen versus the Intel stuff. They made those parts so compelling that yeah, the performance wasn't quite there compared to Intel, but it was just so much cheaper. And that's why AM4 was a huge success.
So, yeah, I think when you've got a company that isn't in a dominant position and maybe doesn't have quite all the tools there, like doesn't have all the features up to scratch or whatever, you really need to make sure that every other part of your team is sort of firing on all cylinders and running at the highest possible capacity. Sort of like a sports team that doesn't have the best players, but if everyone's on the same page running at 100% capacity, you may get a better output than a team of, really star players who are sort of slacking off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I feel like that side of things is sort of letting them down a little bit. And if everyone was sort of working a bit better, working together a bit better, then, yeah, they wouldn't be running into too many of these issues, or at least not as many of the issues. And I think people would be a bit more lenient on some of the other failings, the technical issues that have come up. So, yeah, certainly, I don't know, maybe they need a few changes, shake-ups there to improve things. But, yeah, we'll see.
All right, Tim, it seems like every game launch is plagued by poor performance. However, my view is you can't expect good performance if your CPU/GPU is greater than 2 generations. What's your thoughts? I think people will scoff at that and be a bit upset, but I honestly think that's a pretty reasonable point.
I think that's reasonable. So I did a little bit of research after I looked at this question, and I went back and looked at games that were released around 2015 or 2016, just as a sort of an example of performance for older cards at that time. So, for example, The Witcher 3, which was released in 2015, if you wanted to run it at 1080p Ultra, if you had a GTX 770, that ran at 30 FPS and 36 FPS on a GTX 780. So those cards were 2 years old at the time. They were released in 2013. And again, The Witcher 3 came out in 2015. So yeah, these cards were only really like 1080p medium 60 FPS GPUs in the sort of mid to higher range from 2 years old.
Wow.
Rise of the Tomb Raider, again, it came out in early 2016. That ran at 40 FPS at 1080p high settings on a GTX 770. So that was 3 years old at the time. And 47 FPS on the $500 GTX 780. So these are based on your numbers from TechSpot back in the day.
They're right then.
And then another example, we had Fallout 4. That ran at 66 FPS at 1080p Ultra using the GTX 770 and more like 40 or 50 FPS at 1440p. So we're talking about, this is sort of the equivalent to these days looking at the performance of an RTX 3070. So an RTX 3070 is the mid-range 3-year-old GPU.
You know what the key difference there is? The target for a lot of those games was 60 FPS for like high performance.
Yep.
Because 60 hertz were the monitors available back then.
Yep.
Whereas now you've got, 144 hertz, 165 hertz, 240, so on and so forth. And people like even single player gamers who have enjoyed high refresh rate gaming, because it is really a next level experience. It's what separates PC gaming from console gaming in a big way, especially when you can do so with reasonable quality settings. I think a lot of people now are wanting to get beyond 60 FPS for a lot of their games, because it is, even a game like Shadow of the Tomb Raider plays so much nicer at like 100, 110, 120 FPS opposed to 60 FPS.
That's right.
The game looks better. It's more enjoyable to aim and play. And so, yeah, I think people's requirements have become higher.
That's true.
I was going to say more extreme, but I don't want to say that they're extreme. I think just higher. And the hardware has been lacking. Game development has continued to move forward. I know people will talk about bad optimization, which in a lot of cases is a fair sort of complaint to have. But in other instances, maybe like the upcoming Alan Wake 2 game, the games are just, they've evolved and the hardware hasn't. You've got 4060 Ti's that perform the same as 3060 Ti's.
I think part of it as well is like we go back to this 2015 era, and back then, like the GPU market wasn't that bad. Like at the time, Radeon was coming out with like the R9 290 and stuff like that, which did improve the cost per frame sort of level of that time, and was able to play these games at a slightly higher frame rate as well. So back then it was, I guess it was as well a bit more accepted that your GPU, if it was 2 or 3 years old, may not give you the most premium experience in the latest and greatest AAA games. But people were more willing to upgrade because you could buy a really good quality $300-$400 GPU, and it was a big upgrade over what you had previously. Whereas these days, what you're getting at that same sort of price range is not as much of an upgrade. So people are very much feeling like, well, I've got this GPU and it's aging a little bit. It's now 3 years old or 4 years old, and I'm not getting the performance that I want in this game, but I also don't really have much of an upgrade path because at the same price, I'm getting virtually nothing. So, like, imagine you bought an RTX 3060 Ti that's 3 years old, and you're wanting to play in a game like Alan Wake 2 that mainly run at 1080p below 60 FPS or 1440p below 60 FPS. What are you upgrading to at the same price?
Nothing.
There's like nothing.
You've got to spend a lot more money.
So that's the reality that we're in now versus back then, because it was quite shocking to see some of those figures of previous gen mid-range GPUs running modern games at like 30 FPS, which even back then wasn't like 30 FPS was very much like, okay, if I have to, like it's not great. I'd very much prefer to be playing up in the 60 FPS range or reducing quality settings.
Yeah, the further back in time you go, the lower the frame rate, lower frame rates become more and more acceptable to the point where you just like today you wouldn't even entertain those sort of frame rates.
Yeah, so it's a variety of factors that goes into the expectations that we have today. But generally, I would agree with the premise of this question that if your hardware is 2 generations old or 3+ years old, you probably can't expect it to be doing the highest quality settings, the highest resolutions, the highest frame rates anymore.
Especially because 2 generations isn't 2 years anymore.
That's true. Two generations is more like 5 years, 4 to 5 years for GPUs. So yeah, very much if you'd bought a mid-range card from 2 generations ago, you are pretty much in possession of a low-end entry-level type product at the moment, which again, people don't really like that being pointed out. Like people get that's a bit annoyed that
that's assuming that they had a high-end product to begin with.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, if they spent a reasonable amount of money, then yeah. So anyway, things change. Things change. So yeah. All right, and that does us for part 2 of the Q&A series. I think we'll have a part 3 because of just the amount of high-quality questions that you guys have been asking, whether that's in our Discord community or over on the YouTube community tab. I guess for the Discord community, you have to be a Patreon or Floatplane member, a Hardware Unboxed supporter to access that, which is, just a great place to chat about various different things. We've just recently been getting some input for the next podcast episode as well. It's been a lot of fun. So if you want to know more about what I'm talking about there,
check it out.
You'll have to sign up and see what's going on there. So we also got our monthly live stream, which have already happened by the time this Q&A goes out, but it's always next month. BTS videos. Not that we've been doing a lot of those recently. I'm really not selling this very well, but
no. But you can go back and watch past BTS videos, and there's a lot of some good stuff there.
I think a lot of our BTS content now is more in the Discord, like just you recently been building
photos
some
and
things
stuff.
and
There's some
photos
and
things like that. So there's that as well.
Worth checking out.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I'm your host Tim.
I'm your host Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.